Let's go over these true and false statements about cell communication. After each statement, I'm going to go over the answer and why it's either true or false. With that being said, let's just jump right into it. Molecules that bind to receptor proteins are called ligands. Is this true or false? Remember, we have these small little molecules that are going to interact with a cell's membrane. And whenever they do this, it's going to be at a specific site that's called a receptor protein. Now, these molecules are going to be called ligands, and they help transmit messages between cells. So this answer is true. Kinase enzymes add phosphate groups to molecules. Is this true or false? I always remember that kinases are going to add on phosphate groups, while phosphatases remove these groups. So this one is true. Receptor proteins are typically found in the nuclear membrane. Remember that we have these eukaryotic cells with the receptor proteins in the membrane. You also have a membrane around the nucleus. However, we don't typically find receptor proteins in that membrane. Yes, we can have receptors within the cell, but they're typically not part of this nuclear membrane. So this one is false. Number 4, a single molecule can produce different responses in different cells. So what this is saying is if we have a ligand and it attaches to one cell versus if it attaches to another cell, you're going to have a cellular response in each cell that's a little bit different. This can happen. This is how our cells can efficiently communicate with each other and create different responses very quickly, is if a single ligand can create two different responses in two different cells. So this one is true. Here's our next question. Secondary messengers are located outside of the cell. So remember, we have our cell. It has a receptor protein that binds with a ligand. There's going to be a series of secondary messengers within the cell that help transmit that message internally to create a cellular response. Now, these secondary messengers aren't found outside the cell. They're found inside the cell. So this one is false. Every cell responds to every ligand. This one's pretty easy because of these words, every. It's really tough to have a statement like that where it's going to be true. And in this case, this one is false. Not every cell is going to respond to every ligand. A cell must have the right receptor proteins in order to respond to a signal. So not every cell will respond to every ligand. Kinases amplify a signal. This is talking about these enzymes that are going to add on a phosphate group to a protein. And typically what they do is they do this multiple times, and that helps amplify a signal, where one signal or one ligand can create a bunch of different activated proteins by using this kinase, and this activation helps amplify a signal. So this one is true. Only multicellular organisms use communication. Again, this first word here, only, that's a key word for me. No, not only multicellular organisms use cell communication. Bacteria use cell communication, and essentially they were the first ones to evolve it, again, billions of years ago, before multicellular organisms were a thing. So this one is false. Once a receptor is activated, it stays active permanently. This one's going to talk about how a receptor protein, once it becomes activated, will this interaction ever stop? And think about like your car. When you have a gas pedal and you press on it, it's not always going to be active, because if that would happen, you couldn't drive. So these ligands are going to need to be able to disassociate with the protein in order to deactivate a certain pathway. So this one is false. Next one, when a ligand binds to its receptor, it causes the protein to change shape. Now, we've talked a lot about these receptor proteins and how they bind with ligands. Typically what happens is whenever this interaction occurs, the whole shape of the protein is going to change. We know in science that when you change something's shape, you change its function. And whenever that happens, it's going to relay that message inwards in the cell, taking that message to the secondary messengers and then creating that cellular response. But this is done by this protein changing shape. So this one is true.